Good afternoon, Southern Ontario Podcast Nation. We are back on Friday, October the 17th, 2014 for another edition of the SOS podcast. Hope nobody missed us too much. Shout out to Lindsay, one of our loyal fan followers. We're back on the air, so sorry about that, Linz. We'll get you a good episode in here today. First off, Steve, how's things in Toronto?
Doing well here. Got a little bit of rain, but we got the Leafs in full swing now. The season's in gear, so everyone's in good spirits so far over here.
Good stuff, and those Leafs are 2-2 right now. We'll get into that in a little bit. But before we do, we're going to take a quick minute to get caught up on baseball here. We did miss the end of a couple series over the past week or so. We now stand at a Giants-Royals World Series set to kick off this Tuesday, and we will tee that up on the Monday edition of the show, so we won't get too far into things here. But Steve, for the sake of accountability, I feel the need to point out that you took the Orioles to go through in the AL, whereas I went with the Royals. I stood on the bandwagon. I look good for doing it. Any apologies for your Royals there, or you want to comment on that quickly before we move on?
I think I underestimated their team of destiny status. It definitely looks like no matter what happens, they're going to come through in the clutch. If they need a run, they're going to score it. They need 3 outs, they're going to get them. So I think I've learned my lesson in picking against the Kansas City Royals.
Well, I'm glad you've seen the light. I've obviously been on the Royals for a little while here now. They're undefeated, still rolling through the playoffs. I think it's actually getting to the point of being ridiculous. They're bound for a loss, especially facing a nice, mature and seasoned Giants rotation coming through. But their bullpen in Kansas City is looking untouchable right now. If they can get through 5 innings and have a lead, 6 innings, they are laughing. Do you want to take a quick prediction going into the weekend? Maybe this will change, maybe it won't. Do you think Royals come out? Do they stay Cinderella, or is this go to the Giants without seeing anything further than you know right now?
Just going off what you just said there with the Royals bullpen, I think their starting pitching is good enough to get them, or at least keep them close enough late in games. And once you bring in Herrera, Davis, Holland, even Brandon Finnegan getting in College World Series and Big League World Series in the same year, first player ever, I think they're going to be able to keep close. And once they get there, it's pretty much lights out. So I'm going to pick the Royals.
Yeah, I think despite San Fran having probably the better starting rotation, a hit or two by the Royals, and they've been as clutch as you can get. They've been finding the bats. Let's stick with the Royals, stick with the bandwagon, but I think it's going to be a cool series. It's kind of the tried and tested in the Giants versus obviously a fresh bunch here in the Royals. So we'll talk about a little more about that on Monday's edition of the show, but hockey's back. I'm pumped, Steve. I think you're pumped too. We got a lot to digest here, so let's spend some serious time talking about the Leafs and Senators. Why don't we lead off with the Leafs? Talking about a Toronto team that's been a touch bumpy out the gate. Things didn't start so great, 0-2. They've rebounded for a couple of solid wins. Steve, your early thoughts on the small sample of 4 games here for the Leafs to kick off the season?
I think you've got to be a little bit impressed with how they've come out, especially rebounding from the opening 2 losses and how bad they looked at times in those games, especially in the Pittsburgh game and the way they responded, especially in New York with the big win. But that being said, you've seen the last couple games, the fourth line not really seeing a lot of ice time, the heavy reliance on Fano. So you're wondering if Carlisle is sort of getting back into his old habits and relying too much on certain players. So you have to hope that doesn't continue. And again, with Gardner being benched. But that being said, I think all in all, 2-2, not the worst start in the world for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, you can't argue. It's nice to have a couple wins. I mean, you could be 0-4 at this point, and a lot of tough questions start getting asked. You mentioned kind of the breakdown of ice time on the rink. I think you've seen, at least in the last couple games, the top line has really started pulling their weight, racking up a bunch of points. They had to combine seven points in that New York Rangers win where they really filled the net. So you end up getting a little bit of production from that first line, and it goes a long way. But Bernier and Reimer probably the talking point of Leafs Nation right now. Bernier, your de facto number 1, with Reimer obviously pulling up a close second here, but still a number 2. Reimer so far through 4 games, but 2 apiece, has looked the better tender. What do you do going forward tonight in the next couple days, Steve?
I think you got to keep going with the hot goalie. Reimer's looked good in his 2 games. Being pulled to New York, just the precautionary measure. I think with his history, you have any sort of head contact, especially if the game is out of hand at that point. You've got the win. There's no need to not take him out and make sure he's okay. That being said, Bernier didn't look good in the 2 games he played, especially to start the game off. There's been rumors that he's still feeling some pain in his knee, and one of the big issues with the Leafs last year was getting off to rough starts, and either the first shot of the game going in. So I think you've got to play Reimer now, ride the hot hand, give him the start again tonight, and then maybe go back to Bernier tomorrow to give Reimer some rest so you don't have him playing back-to-back nights.
Yes, we certainly do agree about the bumpy start for Bernier. One question that I like to bring up: Bernier didn't start, particularly the Pittsburgh game. They're down 3-1 in the first. Not a great start. A lot of that was power play effort, if not all of it. Pardon me, was a power play effort on behalf of Pittsburgh. If that game is played against a different opponent, and maybe you don't have such a lethal power play out there, do you think there's a little bit more wiggle room for Bernier at this point, or is it just is what it is? Reimer's the better player at this point. Go with him.
I think there's always going to be a little bit of wiggle room just because everyone sees him as being the de facto number one, or at least eventually that's what he's going to be, and it's not going to be Reimer regardless of how well he plays. But that being said, though, I think for Bernier, against Montreal as well, he did not look strong, especially at the beginning of the game. And I think once Reimer comes in, he showed to be really confident. He's not giving up as many rebounds or as bad rebounds as he has in the past. And I think he's shown that right now the team's playing a little bit better with him in the net.
And Bernier will, I'm sure, regain his form, but obviously he's a little bit slow to start the season here. So I think they stick with Reimer. And again, I kind of like Reimer. Hopefully has another good couple outings there for the Leafs. But looking at his help around the net, we come to the blue line there. A little bit of controversy, and what are they doing with Gardner? Was it just to send a message, giving him a scratch the past couple nights? Sure enough, they of course win those past couple nights. I don't know if that confuses things anymore. I think Gardner is part of that blue line for the better part of the season and going forward. Believe you and I were chatting earlier. Looks like they are going with the Robidas scratch tonight. He's been pretty poor back there so far, especially considering he's brought in to stabilize. Your thoughts on Robida versus Gardner? Is that the trade-off? Is there somebody else in that D mix that would be better served in the press box?
Well, I think right now you definitely want Gardner back in there. If you're going to scratch him to show him some of the mistakes and you want him to improve on that, you got to get him back into game action. He's not going to be able to really fix those things in practice the way you want them to. That being said, though, Robida definitely has merited his non-inclusion in the roster for tonight's game. They said they didn't want him playing 82 games. They want to rest him a little bit, especially coming off his injuries, but he just really looked to be a step slow. And I think Gardner, you just gave him the 5-year, $20 million extension. You've put your faith in him. You got to play him. Whether it's good or bad, you got to let him learn. Just like Riley, he's only going to improve. The more ice time he gets, the more he'll learn. And I think the more you play him, the better he's going to get by the end of the year.
And I think I agree there. You do have to get Gardner back in. I don't know if it has to be at the cost of Robida, but again, I think he sort of walked himself out of the lineup, as it were, with his play early on in the season. And maybe, as you alluded to, they want to give him a few games off, so it all just adds up and makes for a nice, easy decision. Hopefully, it's a good problem, I guess, for the Leafs, and Gardner, comes out and performs and doesn't leave this in question going forward. But bit of an interesting move by Carlisle. There. Lastly, might as well finish it up with a little bit of chat about the forwards. I'm going to go to the Phil Kessel video game winner the other night in OT. That thing was dirty. Is Phil Kessel in line for a 40-50 goal season here, if he's going to be able to pull moves off like that?
I think if he stays healthy, Phil Kessel is perennially going to be a 40-goal scorer. He's got the talent. He's got JVR as a great winger with him, and Bozak, who's an adequate center regardless of the criticism he faces. That being said, the overtime goal, I'm not sold on Colorado's defensive system if they have one at that, especially if you watch. I think it's Nate Holden who just sort of lets Kessel walk out and just glides into the corner. It was a nice goal, but I think there could have been a little bit more resistance on that play.
I will agree with you, Steve. There wasn't a lot of defensive pressure put on him, but Kessel does well to sort of create that play, kind of pull it out of nowhere. Eventually pulling the puck from behind the net out in front, giving a good effort to get the win. So I think it's a big goal for Phil. Certainly keep the Leafs faithful off his back for a little while if things do go south. But we will leave it there and head over to the Ottawa Senators. They've been off to a ever so slightly better start than the Leafs, sitting at 3-1 right now. They opened up the season against Nashville. Tough loss there, given that they were up playing shutout hockey through 2 periods, and things sort of fell apart there in the third for Anderson and company. They then head over to Tampa Bay, get a nice shootout win with Leonard in net. Nice to see him get the shootout victory. And as well, then we head over to Florida, a shutout for Anderson. Wasn't the most inspired hockey, wasn't a full house by any stretch. The crowd down there in Florida leaving a little bit to be desired. But again, another 1-0 victory for the Senators. And then for the home opener last night, exciting game. Nice to see Erik Karlsson announced as the new team captain, of course. So on and so forth, but ultimately getting the win 5-3 against the Avalanche there, and really showing a strong game. They did come back from an early deficit there as well, and played well through especially the second and third period. Steve, your thoughts on basically the early showing from the Senators?
Yeah, I think you got to be in good spirits if you're behind the bench in Ottawa. You're in the management there. I think 3-1's a very good start. Nashville, I think, is a bit of an underrated team. They've got very good goaltending and defense, and Western Conference teams play a lot heavier type of games. So I don't know if the Sens should be expected to win those types of games. I think whether they necessarily didn't play the most energizing hockey in Florida and Tampa Bay, the fact that they're able to pull out the wins, especially with some late goals, shows a lot about the team, and that even if they're not playing their best, they might still be able to get those 2 points.
I would have to agree there, Steve. I think you make a great point. The fact that they are able to hang in there for the 60 minutes, at least after these first few games, showing they can get the points even if things aren't going their way. That's a huge boost of confidence. Hopefully, the guys can build on for the rest of this season. So we'll see what they can do with that. But with that said, why don't we get into some of the specifics here? We'll dive into things. Starting in the goal crease, the Craig Anderson, Robin Lehner split currently at 3 games Anderson, 1 game Lehner. Not quite the same situation as we're seeing out in Toronto, with one tender playing well, one tender playing poorly. In Ottawa, it seems to be a case, the one loss being pegged on Anderson, but he does have the 2 wins to go with it. Lehner is a perfect 1-0 right now. Both have played pretty sound hockey. Steve, how do you see the workload split going forward? Does this a 75% slant to Anderson continue to hold through, or do you think that balances out a little bit moving into the rest of the season?
Probably the whole season. I think Leonard over the last couple of years has shown that he can handle an increased workload in the backup role to the point where he may not even be seen as a backup. I still like Anderson to be the guy when they need a win. He's got the experience. He's been in the playoffs before. He knows what those types of big games are like. Those are so far away, though, in this type of season. So I still think you should see lots of Robin Leonard to go with Craig Anderson.
Fair enough, Steve. I think I will disagree ever so slightly. I personally would love to see Robin Lehner basically be given the opportunity to run and go with it here. Again, he's got a sharp start under his belt, but management and or coaching staff, whatever the situation is, definitely wants to give Anderson, I think, the bulk of the starts. I don't think it's an accident that Anderson's got the 3 starts to the 1 for Lehner. So while you're optimistic for a 50-50 split, and I would probably settle for that at this point, again, I'd like to see Lehner out there quite a bit more, but I don't think it's going to be happening to this point. And I think this 3 games Anderson, 1 Lehner probably does stick out. Then again, 3-1 hockey team can't argue much. So if they want to play this way the rest of the year, I'm okay with that too. That aside, we'll have a look quickly at the blue line and how things have developed there. I think the big issue of the day here is the play of Jared Cowan. Still making some brutal giveaways at times, really costing the team, and a lot of the time it's leading very directly to goals. His mistakes. There's a lot of chat about him getting scratched. I don't think that's maybe a terrible idea. I think at this point here, Jared Cowan, you've got to realize the training wheels have got to come off at some point. It's time to grow up a little bit. Definitely Mark Mathot needs to come back, and that would help this blue line quite a bit. I don't think it blew anybody away over the course of the first 4 games. If Mark Mathot does draw back in and Cowan's a scratch, that leaves an interesting situation here in Ottawa, and maybe one somewhat unexpected. Steve, what's your thoughts on the future of Jared Cowan, both immediate and maybe long term?
I think, especially once Mathot gets back, if Cowan is back in the lineup by then, he's going to have a prolonged stay in the press box. He'll have a really tough time bumping one guy out, let alone 2 from the top 6. Maybe Phillips interchanges with him at times in the press box, but I think he is stuck there for a little bit. I mean, Carlson's been his usual great self. That goal in the Tampa game to get them tied up was really, I mean, that rush to set it up, and then he just gets wide open and waits out Bishop and puts the puck in. So I think you have nothing to worry about with him, but you're still, I think, between the gap between Carlson and the rest of the D, you're still looking. I think you need Method back or someone else in there to make sure you've got another steady presence in there.
Absolutely, Steve. A solid veteran presence, Mark Mathot. You got to have him back. Look forward to him getting back in the lineup. As for Jared Cowan, you make a great point. If he shows up in the press box and you get a healthy Mark Mathot back, you have other arrangement of players that maybe they like a little bit more right now. Who does he bump in the end when it comes down to it? Maybe the name that does come up, at least for me, anyways. Maybe give him some ice time over Chris Phillips. I think that's a wiser investment in the long run. I mean, obviously, Jared Cowan, maybe for better or worse at this point, is part of the future. He needs to be on the ice. He needs to play. Whereas Chris Phillips, of course, winding down his career. Love the leadership, but maybe that's somewhere they look. Moving along, we'll have a quick chat here about the forwards. I think overall it's been positive. Steve hasn't been a slow start this season. They found their goals when they've needed them. They found them in bunches in some cases. But for me, it really comes down to their younger forwards. I think looking really strong. Curtis Lazar, name you really got to like. He was all over the ice last night. Should have had his first goal there. Kind of stolen away from Zach Smith. Zach, what are you doing, bud? But Curtis Lazar, just everywhere, Johnny on the spot. Infusion of energy he's bringing along, and it's great to see. Mark Stone as well. He's got a couple big goals. Seems to be in the right place again all the time. I love the young guys. Your thoughts on the play of the forward unit, Steve?
Yeah, I think you've got to be pleased again with the way the younger players have been able to step into the lineup and not really seem overmatched. Hoffman, obviously, with the experience last year at the end of the season, you might have been able to figure he's going to be able to step in there and pick up where he left off. But I think Lazar and especially Stone showing some nice improvement, although he had prior experience as well, being able to hold his own and battle in front of the net and score some big goals. And of course, you've got Zibanejad, who may not be as young as the other guys are talking about, but is still a relatively young player in the grand scheme of things. And he really looks like he's going to step it up to the next level this year.
Yeah, Zibanejad, that's a great name to bring up as well. He gets a nice shootout winner for the team. Key 2 points. I mean, great job by Zibanejad on that, and actually great job as well to Robin Lehner, who might have struggled a little bit in the shootout last season and in his past opportunities, but he does get the win here, so good for him as well. Before we duck out of the NHL entirely, why don't I get your thoughts here, Steve, on the Montreal Boston game last night? Pardon me. More particularly, Milan Lucic, of course, center of attention as always in certainly a heated series. Your thoughts on Lucic last night and his behavior?
I think if I'm Claude Julien, I'd be a bit more upset taking that penalty with less than 2 minutes left with your team trailing by one than whatever taunting you'll get fined for. Right there pretty much salts away the game that even if you pull your goalie, you don't even have the extra attacker anymore. You pretty much sealed the deal for Montreal. They scored. P.A. Parenteau got his second of the game to the empty net shortly after, and I just thought you let his emotions, take over, and that wasn't the right time to go after Emelin, even though Emelin had hit him earlier in the game.
Steve, you bring up the key word, I think, in emotions. Both Milan Lucic as well as the arena itself. Of course, all the animosity built up from the playoff series last year. This rivalry is on fire right now. It's a great one to watch. Milan Lucic, maybe a boneheaded move, but he certainly adds to the fun of it all. And I'll give him a pass on this because I think it makes for some great television. This all being said, let's have a round of pick your poison here after the first week, Steve. We're gonna go off the map because we get a little crazy. Once in a while we do get a little crazy. So let's do it. We're gonna switch over from the Atlantic Division over to the Metropolitan here for a second. We're going to talk about young leaders and who you would like, Steve. So the first name we'll throw out there is a young John Tavares leading the New York Islanders to a 4-0 start, first place in the division. So Johnny Tavares, your first call there, Steve. Second choice, Sidney Crosby, of course, of the Pittsburgh Penguins. A few steps behind Tavares in the scoring right now, but sure to have another great season, Sidney Crosby. And the third choice, a young gun here. We'll maybe go out on a little bit of a limb with Ryan Johansson of the Columbus Blue Jackets. Currently at 2-1, same record as the Penguins right now, sitting 4-5. The Penguins and Blue Jackets are. Ryan Johansson will be the third player in this Pick Your Poison Young Leaders Metropolitan Division.
It's hard to go against Tavares considering he's got arguably the best team-friendly contract contract in the entire NHL for what he produces. Again, he's leading the team in points. Islanders are off to a great start, and coming back off the injury he sustained in the Olympics, it's good to see him really looking like he's taking the next step from superstar to truly elite world talent. That being said, though, I still don't think he's in that Crosby level. Crosby still puts up insane numbers, and he's doing it night in, night out with Kunitz, Dupuis, Hornquist, who isn't a bad player himself, but I don't think any of those guys are at the level of a Kyle Okposo who Tavares gets to play with every night. And I just think when it comes down to it, if there's one guy you want to be your centerman, I think it's going to be Sidney Crosby.
Well, Steve, I won't give you too tough of a time over the choice of Sidney Crosby for obvious reasons. But before I get to my pick, I would like to give a bit of a nod to Ryan Johansson. He won me over in a heck of a push for the playoffs by the Blue Jackets last year. Just a pile of timely goals when they needed them most over that run. So I'm excited to see his growth and development over the years, and I think he will make a great young leader. That aside, I don't want to take Crosby here. I will go with John Tavares, a few years younger, and I think he's really hitting his stride, and he can do some great things in Long Island. The way he's able to develop and generate the offense himself doesn't really rely on many others to necessarily provide it for him. He's able to do that himself, much like Crosby. But I think John Tavares, he makes it for an interesting call. And this might very well be the Islanders' season with those few extra additions on the blue line in the offseason in the early part of the year here. So, Steve, you've got Crosby. I've got Tavares. I'll see you in a decade. We'll add it all up and see where we stand then. The last topic we want to touch on today before wrapping up with the NHL, appointment of Chris Pronger to the Department of Player Safety. Of course, Chris Pronger, fairly notorious for his actions on the ice, not unfamiliar with suspensions over his career, definitely always pushing the boundary. And as well, actually currently employed by the Philadelphia Flyers, so maybe a little bit of conflict of interest there. Steve, what are your thoughts here on Chris Pronger in the NHL's Department of Player Safety?
Still get cap relief while Pronger is working for the NHL, I think is a bit iffy. I think if you're another team, you might wonder how are they still able to get this extra four and a bit million space where this guy's clearly, if he's now working for the NHL, is not actively trying to come back and play for the team. That's where I have a bit of an issue, and I wonder if there may be a complaint filed in someone saying, hey, this is a competitive advantage. They're given an extra $4.5 million of cap space here.
Yeah, no, I have to completely agree with you there, Steve. A little bit of an odd situation for them, the Flyers with the salary cap space and the relationship, his position with the league. Perhaps something in the future should be written in to dissuade this type of thing, but it is what it is right now. Seems as though everybody's sort of washed their hands of it and moved on. In saying that, the shock value for me was seeing Chris Pronger, of course, one of the vigilantes on the ice in his day, just multiple suspensions, never really regarded as the cleanest player, but I guess the devil's advocate says a criminal, you hire a criminal mind, and that's certainly what they've done with Chris Pronger. So hopefully his experience in those situations and at times being that type of player will help him here and serve to be of some value. So we'll see how Chris does. All the best to him, and hopefully works out for the league players and everyone else who's a stakeholder there. All right, Steve, well, we've spent pretty well 80% of our show here chatting about hockey, so why don't we take a quick step away? Some interesting results from this past weekend in the NFL. Why don't we touch on those? The highlight of last weekend, certainly the Dallas Football Cowboys playing out there in Seattle. Impossible stadium to win at. They basically do the impossible. They do win. They're looking good. DeMarco Murray rushes for 100 yards in his sixth consecutive game. Seattle defense pretty much dominated by the offensive line of the Cowboys, and everything clicked for Dallas. Instead of finding a way to lose, they found a way to win. Your thoughts on that game, Steve, what it means for the Cowboys going forward?
Yeah, I think it means a lot for them going forward, especially just to give them that confidence that maybe that this isn't the year where everything that can go wrong will go wrong for them. I mean, DeMarco Murray, everyone's waiting. When is he finally going to come back down to earth? But it just seems that every game he's putting up the same great numbers, the same great production. And you've got Des Bryant and even Terrence Williams that when you need a big play, a big catch to be made, they're making it. And
couple injuries along their offensive line, so maybe we'll start to see DeMarco slow down a little bit. But I mean, if you can play this kind of game against Seattle, I'm willing to take a few backups on that line, and I think he can roll it through for the better part of the league. So I'm going to say the Cowboys are probably a playoff team. They'd have to certainly do some work to find themselves out of the playoffs at this point. Steve, you think they make it?
I do think they make it. I think so long as their Dez and Terrence Williams and the rest of the receiving corps stays healthy, that'll keep the running game open enough to keep them successful.
All right, so we'll see you Cowboys in the playoffs. Speaking of playoffs, is it crazy talk? Cleveland Browns. Can we see them possibly getting there? And does that it's a hot issue right now, Steve? Brian Hoyer, Johnny Manziel. How do you see this shaking down in the coming months and coming years?
Well, I think everyone had by week 6 at the latest, maybe that you would have seen Johnny Manziel at least get his chance by now. But I think it's safe to say that he's probably farther away than he's ever been in terms of getting that starting job. Is Hoyer's just been great with Cleveland. He's responsible. He doesn't turn the ball over. He gets them. He gets them down the field when they need points, such as they had 28-point comeback when it 2 weeks ago. Last week they blow out the Steelers. Coming up, their next 3 games at Jacksonville versus Oakland versus Tampa. I really don't think it's absurd to say Cleveland could be 6-2 at the midway point of the season.
Yeah, and how scary is that with Halloween around the corner? Cleveland Browns possibly a 6-2 football team, but you're right; they're looking dynamite right now. They're running the ball with authority. I'm a big fan of the run game, and I think it take you a lot of places. It can create a lot of time and lanes for your quarterback. In this case, Brian Hoyer to operate in. Long term for the quarterback situation, I would have been one of those people who had Johnny Manziel playing football for the Cleveland Browns by week 6, if not week 4. I thought maybe by week 6 Johnny Manziel would have already burnt out, but you can't even find him in a newspaper right now. It's amazing to see where this came from in the off season. The swirl of controversy that Johnny Manziel brought in when he was drafted, and who knows where it was all going to play out to the Cleveland Browns being a particularly tough situation with the potential of signing Hoyer, letting him walk. All very cloudy. Let's go Browns though. It's fun to follow along, so I'm interested to see where they excuse me they wrap up in and around that 8 game mark with those three games on the schedule. And maybe we'll finish off here with the Detroit Lions. Having continued kicking issues, finding a way to pull out a win here and there along the way, but this is just getting silly now, Steve. Is there some ghost in the building? Not that it's only at home, but what's up with these Detroit kicking issues? Is this just a fluke?
Yeah. Yeah, you got to wonder if the ghost of still alive Jason Hansen is haunting those uprights there
Jason
in Detroit.
Hansen,
Yeah. So if Matt Prater comes in, arguably one of the best kickers in the league, definitely well regarded as one of the best kickers in the league, even in altitude at Denver, and he goes 1 for 3. They still get the win, but I think the Lions have missed. They've missed over 10 now for sure. I think the number is at 11 field goals already this year, which is just a crazy high number through 6 weeks. And you have to wonder if this is the year they're going to reach that next level and really be able to compete in the playoffs. They've got the offense. Their defense looks to be competent, but you just got to wonder, is this going to be the issue that brings them down this year?
Yeah, that's it. And it's got to be frustrating for Detroit. I mean, their defense is, I would argue, top 3, at worst top 5. They're just firing right now. The offense, if anything, uncharacteristic for past seasons, is if anything the thing holding them back. I mean, they do have the injuries to Megatron. Definitely, they are not the same team on that side of the ball without Calvin Johnson playing. I don't think there's any argument there. But Matthew Stafford even has looked like he's taken maybe a little bit of a regression. Their running game not quite as effective. So I don't know if this is the year that they take that next step, but it would be awfully frustrating given the way the defense is playing if this isn't the year for that. But that's where we'll wrap up there. I think any final notes heading into the NFL weekend for you, Steve?
Nothing too crazy. Just looking forward to seeing some teams shed the pretender or contender status and seeing where that leads.
Yeah, I think that's our hometown Bills might be in that category.
Yeah.
Few clutch wins, a couple terrible losses mixed in. Most recently, of course, New England. And what happens to this football team? Are they for real, or is Kyle Orton and company some smoke and mirrors to get us through another season? So we'll look forward to that this weekend. I think that does wrap up the show, Steve. Hopefully everything goes well for you in Toronto. Any exciting plans for Saturday, Sunday, or just laying low?
Just laying low here, probably taking the rare Friday night Maple Leafs home game. So see how that goes.
The Friday Nighters, they're about the bane of my existence here in Ottawa. Ottawa has a pile of them. I hate every single one of them. There's no emotion in the building. People can't enjoy themselves. It's terrible. So hopefully it sucks down there in Toronto and they don't do too many of them. I mean, and only in the best, because I think all hockey should be played on Saturday night. I don't see any reason why you can't do it 9 times out of 10. That's my thought. So we'll end it there before I get into a rant. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening this Friday afternoon. Enjoy your weekend and join us Monday for another episode.